So there's two different streams here. There's mega stream, which is $500 million projects, which may never be built because China is cheaper. And then there's the turnarounds, which won't happen if the projects don't get built. This is the stream where there's actual money. This is predictable. This is reliable. This is based on assets that are right here. And this is the team that's going to tell us all about it. So as we were working on this theme, we really wanted to focus down on the smaller projects. That's why you're going to see $100 million and below. And we also wanted to inject a very relevant theme today, which is the advanced workplace planning. So what are some of the lessons learned around the application of advanced workplace planning for small projects? So without further ado, we have a really experienced team here, a team that's done global mega projects, and that's doing small projects. So relevant, very much experience. Brad Young from ExxonMobil, 30 years experience, got both owner and contractor experience with Exxon and KBR, and has handled a number of projects himself. Chesley, who will be speaking next, will be manager of LNG services. Again, coming off a mega project in Australia and now doing small projects on those assets. Roger will bring in a perspective from Brazil. He's the head of the Braskem small capital projects, running a program of 100 projects at the moment. And he'll talk about the work that he's doing. And last but not least, Justin came all the way from California. He's with Endeavor, also running a program of small projects. So without further ado, let me ask Brad. Brad, could you please start?
Thank you. If you don't mind, Vikas, I'll stand up because I'm going to fall asleep here if we sit all day. So I'm going to try to cover, probably we could easily be a 5-hour conversation in about 5 minutes or less. But I thought what I'd focus on a little bit when we're talking about the subject is what are some of the key focus areas or decisions that we make when we're deciding what our execution strategy is going to be for a mid-sized capital project. And then as time permits, a little bit about the extent of AWP we're going to use on those projects. So the first thing is, I'm sure a lot of owners out there, you have a local projects organization at your sites of varying capabilities. They usually are portfolio project teams. You know, they do a lot of ongoing work, maintenance projects and larger. And so one of the first things we're looking at when we have a larger capital project come in is, do we want to do it in the portfolio work method, or do we want to actually form a standalone project team? And there's a number of factors that come into that, but some of the key factors are, well, if it's a portfolio, that's a very capital-efficient way of doing work. You have part-time resources, you've got contractors, both engineering and construction, are very familiar with the site, and so it can be very capital-efficient. On the flip side, portfolio work processes traditionally are a little more about workload balancing and a little less about schedule compliance. I mean, there is a schedule, of course, but the schedule usually is going to be sacrificed, to get blacked out during turnarounds and things like that. So if the project is, if the project is large or complex, multiple disciplines, that typically starts to get beyond the capabilities of our portfolio organizations. And there's no hard and fast number, but 5 million plus or something like that. That's when the portfolio starts getting overwhelmed. And the second part is the project schedule driven or cost driven? If it's a compliance project or you're going to have a turnaround you got to get within or something like that, then obviously that's going to be challenged to do in the portfolio work process. Downside, obviously, of putting together standalone teams is less capital efficient. You got to have more resources. And when we try to do standalone projects at our local site organizations, that sometimes they are resource limited within that project organization because it takes more people.
Yeah, I got to
get the work done. I think we're getting cross mic here. So anyway, so that's kind of our first decision point is, are we going to self-manage? We're going to portfolio, do it under portfolio work process. And once we kind of land on a self-managed project, the next decision point is often, how are we going to do construction? Are we going to self-manage construction, or are we going to use contractor, either an EPC or a general contractor? And again, no hard and fast rules on that, but that starts coming in maybe 20 million, 50 million plus kind of number, depending on the capabilities of the local site. And also the complexity of the work. Is it multiple disciplines? Is it civil, mechanical, E&I, and everybody? Or is it pretty much just like a large maintenance project? Self-manage, again, more efficient. It can be done with part-time resources. You don't have that layer of management between the owner and the craft or the subcontractors. Downside is if we're going to self-manage and we're doing a standalone project, you're going to need a lot more resources from the owner side to fill in all those positions that a CM would normally fill for you. And also, you can't lose track of the site that the local contractors bringing a lot of tools and systems that are kind of working in the background that you might have available to you when you're doing a standalone project self-managed. You know, how are you going to control document management? Well, ExxonMobil doesn't have a document management system for capital projects. You know, we rely on contractors. So if you're going to do self-managed, you better figure out how you're going to get some of that kind of stuff done. And then lastly, we kind of learned, our kind of hard lessons learned is just because you have a local organization of a lot of experienced people doesn't mean they can necessarily jump in and start doing self-managed projects. They just maybe don't have experience in things like how do you bid out and award contracts, you know, and things like that. They're used to just making a release against the standing contract and things like that. So don't just presume that the folks, just because they have gray hair, know how to do it. So the other part I was going to mention briefly is AWP and how much we apply AWP. And I guess the theme on AWP a little bit is it is a work process. It's not a tool. And when we've brought AWP out to our sites, you know, a lot of scared people. I hope there's no Bentley people in the room here, but all they think is construct sim and oh my God, that's $200 an hour a consultant and blah, blah, blah. And we can't possibly afford this on this little job. So what we've typically done is said this is a tiered process. And the first tiers we can do ourselves. We don't need tools or systems. The first thing is just doing interactive planning, you know, planning a project with the end in mind, with the MC date in mind, actually planning the engineering so it supports construction. And those of us who have a little bit of gray hair think that's just good engineering. That's just good project management, but unfortunately that skill seems to have been lost. So first thing we typically do is IAP, and we feel it's important enough that we brought that skill set in-house, and we have resources who are trained up in being able to run IAP sessions with project teams, and also recognize in the Heritage Portfolio work process, the EP and C weren't as coordinated. It would typically was the engineering kind of get thrown over the fence to the construction side because the schedule wasn't that critical. This construction work would just be worked in with all the other projects going. And so this kind of reinforces, especially at the local projects level, that we're going to do a cradle-to-grave schedule with logic ties and everything makes sense so that we can confirm that the engineering is going to support the construction or the long lead equipment or whatever. And also worth mentioning on the AWP side briefly is, so the last step, which is, you know, taking it all the way to the field work packs and everything, we do that at sites, but it's often just a manual process. You know, it's Excel spreadsheets, it's ISOs, PNIDs, and a stapler, which is probably good enough in a lot of cases, right? Because we don't want to become slaves of the tool. So there's, again, just getting back to the point that it's a process, it's not a tool necessarily, and it can be applied at all levels. And just those first two levels, doing basic planning and breaking the work up and engineering work packs and construction work packs, may be enough for your project. And you might get the bang for your buck you're looking for there. So it's really about all I had. And time-wise, we're okay? All right.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Brad. That's great. So that's a great perspective from an Exxon view. How about from the contractor perspective, Chesley?
Great, thank you. So, again, my name is Chesley Russo. I work with Bechtel. Bechtel's a global leader in providing engineering, procurement, construction, and startup services on projects, primarily recently, you know, mega projects. But we're bringing our oil, gas, and chemical business line is bringing that expertise to small projects to answer many of the questions and concerns owners have that Brad just raised. You know, we want to bring that experience and expertise down to a more manageable level. When I first joined Bechtel, we had a number of alliances with owners like Chevron and Phillips, just to name a few. And our teams got very close, and we knew each other's work processes. I mean, I felt like I wore out a seat on Southwest Airlines up and down to Borger, Texas, working on that facility. And there's a lot of advantages to that type of model and having that relationship is you end up with a team that knows your facility, knows your work processes, and not just by the books, but actually at the site. They know your people, they know your value proposition, and you're able to come up with an execution plan like was talked about this morning to answer all that questions. What do you want out of this project? Do you want to be hands-on? Do you want to form a collaborative team? Do you want the contractor to take the lead and call you when it's done, if you will? And so we see a lot of value in being able to bring that breadth of different execution models to the small project market. So when you have that team, when you look at it maybe either as a standalone or portfolio, but you're working with that core team and working closely as a team, not hey, I'm the owner, I'm the contractor, but it's a one team type approach. You can get in there and be collaborative, and we can come in at the beginning when you just have an idea of what you want to do, but maybe you haven't fully scoped it out. We heard the panel this morning talk about scope is key, and how contractors can come in and really help with that development, doing some front end. And if you do want to apply AWP, you need to start looking at it at the front end. Don't wait until you're ready to go into construction and say, oh, I want to apply AWP, but I have this engineering package and I have this different procurement package. The other advantage we can bring is a single interface. When you talk about small projects and when you start chopping them up into multiple interfaces, that's more burden on you as the owner's team to potentially manage, and it can be reduced with the right model. Like I said, again, you can get in there and develop collaborative solutions. In a little bit, Justin's going to talk about how those teams can work together. So to talk a little bit about scaling down, right? We talk about the different projects, the elements you've got of a project that you have to do. You've got to develop your scope. You've got to develop your schedule. You've got to develop your budget. A lot of those processes doesn't change. But what does change is when you look at a small project, the key mantra is fit for purpose. What do I really need to do to get the job done? Okay, not layers and layers of approvals and different, bureaucracy that sometimes is very appropriate for a big project because you have a lot of stakeholders. They're spread out all over the world. You're doing work in multiple locations. I mean, a good example is when you do your design documents. On a mega project, you're going to need to be issuing those, at every step of the way, because you have a huge distribution list. You have to get it to a mod yard over in China, for instance, and the site, and the stakeholders and the owners back here in the U.S. But when you're at a small project level, if you're at a regional, local level, you can look at things working on red lines. You don't necessarily have to CAD it at every step. And you can bring those scaling factors to have some capital efficiency because, as we all know, it's important for these projects to get off the ground that you're capital efficient. And then you can look at your execution plan in terms of your location. You want to get regional, you want to be local, you want to work obviously with the site and the stakeholders in operations. But you also want to be able to reach back and draw on the expertise that maybe a contractor has in their home office. Maybe this is a particularly challenging project around your transients and your hydraulics, and you may not necessarily have that at a local level, but in an alliance situation, you're able to draw back and reach back to that expertise. So just to talk a little bit about AWP from our perspective, again, we would echo Brad's comments, is it's a process versus a rigid tool. You want to integrate it with the work processes that work for you. And of course, as a contractor, we've developed certain key processes and have integrated it in that. And you've got to start from the end in mind and kind of pull the string through. So when you look at potentially breaking it up into E, P, and C or CM, that's when it really gets to be a challenge to execute AWP. So now I'll hand it over to Roger, he'll give you an example.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your attention. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I will try to give you perspectives from our experience at Braskem in Brazil. Okay. I would like to highlight to you, three major points regarding the use of the AWP process for small caps. The first is about organizational structure. When you are dealing with a program, a portfolio program for small caps project, with dealing with 200 and 250 projects, you have all the processes and all the procedures well established. So from that derives that you have a specific organizational, organic organizational structure to run this portfolio. So this can be a challenge when you try to use the AWP process. For ourselves, it was a challenge. Because, for example, to use the AWP process, it demands that you have a planning functional staff, a huge planning functional staff to run the AWP. So for us, it was difficult because in the early phases, in the FEL 1 and FEL 2 phases of the project, we don't have all this structure. So we don't have these people, this planning staff to run the scope of the the scope of the project, to deal with the planning of the construction, the planning of the vendors and the purchase. So how are we going to do that? So we will have to change things. So this is something that we are facing now. We have to change the way that we do the things in order to get this structure, this process inside our portfolio management. And so probably you have to hire people, you have to train people, you have to change the way you do, as I said. And this takes us to another point, important point, the second point, that it's about contracting modes. In Brazil, we deal with long-term contracts for engineering and construction. So they are contracts for 3 to 4 years, normally based in a unit price, not in for global price or lump sum projects as you do in an EPC project. So this is another challenge. So because for us, for our understanding, the use of the AWP, it's very related to a global price project for an EPC project. But when we deal with this portfolio management, how you do that? How you arrange these contracts to achieve the results that you are expecting to have with the AWP. So this is another challenge for us. So we have to change everything. We have to change the organizational structure. You have to change the contract modes that we are dealing with. So, of course, that it seems to us that it's easier if you decide to go to run a project by itself. A particular project to use the AWP. But when you discuss to use this for a portfolio, for a program, so this can be challenging. And that goes to my third point, that's about the process, the initiation process for projects. Braskem used the FEL methodology, as many companies. So we have a lot of deliverables for this first phase, for the FEL 1 and for the FEL 2. But we don't have the AWP deliverables on these procedures. So we will have to change that again. So it demands an extra effort to run the AWP in the project program. And this goes to another point that in our case, for example, the point about the approval of the project, At Braskem, we just get the approval for the project after the FEL 3, after the base design engineering. I think it's the same here, but this is a problem for us because if we just have the approval after the design, the basic design engineering, we will just have the money for the project after the base design engineering. So how do you get all the budget that you need, all the money that you need to reimburse this this earlier service that we will have to conduct to achieve the AWP process. So this is something that we are dealing now. We're discussing with our board. We have to show then that the use of the AWP process will be effective. It will be a cost and schedule effective in reduction of the cost and the schedule in order to guarantee all this staff, this engineering staff that you need in the early phases. So these are the 3 major points that I'd like to share. Okay?
Thanks, Roger. Appreciate it. Justin?
So my name is Justin Shapiro. I work with Endeavor. I've been involved in and helped manage projects that range in size from about as small as 3 million all the way up to about 14 billion. And as a project engineer, a lot of the deliverables that are required to build confidence on those project management systems, the responsibility for creating those deliverables falls to the project engineer to control. So with that in mind, I have a lot of passion behind scaling down the deliverables we put together for the major projects, which are in the room next door, those $10, $14 billion jobs, and scaling down, making them user-friendly for the $3 million, the $5 million projects, the ones that don't have the same resources, but we have the same level of expectation for completeness, for predictability, for cost and schedule adherence. And been working a lot on ways to get those programs scaled down. And I think something that doesn't get enough attention in the project management world are the soft skills that help you get to those scaled down systems. And let me explain what I mean by that. With my current company, we have 113 unique deliverables for our major capital projects that need to be reviewed and approved and endorsed before we can request full funding at Gate 3 or end of FEL 3. But don't worry, we scaled that down for our small cap projects to only 97. And to say, you have a tenth the resources, whether it's on the contractor side or the owner's side or the project engineers, and yet you have 90% of the deliverables. And you say, that's not sustainable. I mean, for a $3 million job, you'll spend more money, printing out paper to meet those demands than to actually execute the project. And so we need to find ways to reduce the number of deliverables, but still maintain a high level of performance on those jobs. And what I've discovered is that we have tools to do that, because who actually owns the approval for those deliverables is your gatekeeper and your key stakeholders. And so to reduce those deliverables, get approval to do that in a constructive and a coherent manner, you need to get the buy-in from the gatekeeper. And do we have a couple people who are familiar with PMI and PMPs here, project management professionals? Anyone else besides myself? Excellent. I don't know if anybody knows what the very, very last chapter in the PEM book, the guide for project management, is, but it's stakeholder management. I think that we make a mistake putting that all the way at the back end, especially for small caps jobs. If we bring the deliverable of stakeholder management planning all the way up to the forefront and set it out in front of us to begin with, to identify the key stakeholders, the gatekeeper, understand their needs and wants. Are they supporters or just detractors for the project? What are the risks that they see that are important? What is their risk tolerance? What's their opinion of the project team and of past experiences there? And if we can put that all together and understand and identify the individuals, not just the positions, not just a project executive, not just the refinery manager or what the case may be, but actually know the individuals and take the time to get to know their fears and concerns about a project, we can build a relationship where they can then, through collaboration, reduce those deliverables and turn into something that's really a comprehensive program. And this is very difficult to do when we have smaller projects. You think, we already have so many deliverables, how could we add another one to that? But if we're taking a suite of projects with the same set of key gatekeepers and key stakeholders, and we can put this up front at the pre-appraise, the pre-gate 1 phase, and make that a priority to identify what their risks and what their risk tolerance is and what their concerns about the teams are, and then alleviate those concerns through a relationship, we can then eliminate the hard copy, the paper, the thick binders of project execution plans and quality management plans and the PDRI reviews and the estimate confidence packages, because they already have confidence in the team. And the real key takeaway here is you need to move the small cap project gatekeepers into a trust but verify position. Not a verify, and then trust a little bit once you have full funding. But really get into the position where they know the team, they know the contractor, repeatability, and that they can allow certain non-direct value-adding deliverables to be waived and really focus on the deliverables that add value to the smaller cap projects. So.
Very good.
Thank you. So, Joshua, do you think we could go to Slido, the questions now? We tried to put more time for questions to try and get a little more interaction.
They're there.
Here we go. So there's a lot of questions about AWP, everything associated with interfacing, procurement, cost of engineering, and some examples. So why don't we take it through the panel? You want to start?
I might start with the last one, if you don't mind. What would be some examples of how AWP would differ between small and large cap projects? Well, as I kind of referenced a little bit, it's around the tool to me, because because the tool for very small projects, if you want to go ahead and take it all the way to the third tier, which is a field work packs, which is what a lot of the CII and everyone would tell you is where you get the bang for your buck. We do this today, and we've done this in our portfolio work process, like in Baytown for 15, 20 years. And it's just, well before computers, it's just a matter of getting planners who understand the work, who know how to bundle it up and what the sequence can be and should be, and sitting down with a set of P&IDs and a set of ISOs and a schedule, and stapling those together. It can be as simple as that, and we'll track it in an Excel spreadsheet. And also, I'd mentioned briefly on that, as I did before, is at a certain point, you've done most of your heavy lifting by just planning the work up front, and maybe you don't need to don't need to do that whole work pack thing. Just the interactive planning up front and making sure the engineering deliverables at that level 2, level 3 schedule and the procurement deliverables are lining up with the construction sequence.
Any thoughts on that?
Anybody else want to chime in?
Chesley?
No, I completely agree, and I'm looking at the second question: does use of AWP increase overall engineering cost? And I guess you can look at it 2 ways. I mean, if you look at AWP as a way of doing work and a way of integrating it into your work processes, ultimately it shouldn't increase the overall cost. But if you look at it as a tool and, use it, I don't want to say incorrectly, but if you apply it rigidly and not think about fit for purpose, then yes, it can absolutely increase your engineering costs because you're adding layers of complexity that maybe you don't need.
Yes, I agree with Chesley. When you talk about only the engineering from the EPC, yes, I think we will increase the overall engineering cost, but I think it's not too much, It's just a different way of doing things. But the expected cost of all the project is expected to be less. It's expected to be better. And I think it values, you have a very value-added using the AWP process.
I guess I'll field the last question that was up there. It was about how to get procurement involved on the small caps, advanced work packaging side. What we've experienced in the past is that small cap projects usually try to avoid going through the whole bidding process to try to shorten the time frame. That's a resource constraint to have to go through a whole bid process and get everyone involved. And they tend to just end up back with the same fabricators, same vendors over and over again. And right, wrong, or otherwise, it does give you an advantage with advanced work packaging where you already know who your suppliers are, who you commonly go to, and they tend to, if you're able to, have them on the same side of the table as your construction group when you start advanced work packaging at the very beginning. It helps if it's a portfolio of projects because it does bring more resources to bear, but just one-off projects there, having your procurement group, your supplier, your construction all involved in that early planning does have significant advantages. And procurement is usually very much on board with being participants there because they're at least in my experience, they tend to feel like they're forgotten, where it's the engineering to construction interface that's managed by advanced work packaging and not the engineering to procurement and supplier interface. But their input is just as important, especially small caps job, short schedule with long lead equipment. So they're a key member of that advanced work packaging, giving input to make sure that the deliverables that haven't been waived by your gatekeeper are still are focused on their needs as much as on construction's needs.
Justin, I might add to that one. In fact, when we're doing interactive planning, we expect a procurement representative to be participating in that. Nothing else to kind of validate what we've assumed the delivery time is for some of our equipment. And do we have a chance to go global worldwide procurement? Or no, has to be domestic and we have to go back to brand X because we don't even have time to do terms and conditions negotiations or whatever. We expect him or her to be there and actively participate.
Thank you. I think there's an interesting question there about the scaling down. So should you look to scale down large project requirements or grow small project requirements from the base requirements up? And maybe as you answer the question, maybe you can identify whether there is a different work processes for large projects and small projects that are significantly different in your organizations. So perhaps you'd like to start. Right.
Sure. Okay. Well, as I mentioned before, I think one of the key things, it's not so much small and large cap projects or how much the project costs, but our local organizations have typically built themselves up around a portfolio work process. And they've built up their work process also intimately tied to a local engineering contractor, where the scope of what the local project organization done is somewhat driven by the capabilities of that local engineering contractor. If they're not good in process engineering, then we're going to have more process engineering as part of our deliverable. So to me, that's kind of the key differentiator for us so much is what's the capabilities of local organization, and is that local work process, if it's truly built on a portfolio, then maybe that global work process is where you want to start, with Justin's recognition that you can't bring the 800-pound gorilla to the $5 million project.
Right. And I think looking at that from the flip side, when you start with the 800-pound gorilla, if you will, sometimes it's hard to get rid of it, right? You say, I kind of really need that. I kind of really need that. But when you get teams to almost start with a blank sheet of paper, they'll really crystallize it and say, this is just what I need. So I think there's value to both approaches depending on the project. But I guess if asked, personally, we do it from the bottom up to make sure you don't get that extraneous requirements in.
Couldn't agree more. It's so difficult to remove the large project requirements going to small, and if you have the real problem I've encountered is that a lot of small caps project groups at individual plants, refineries, don't have comprehensive systems. And I know I'll eat my words another time, but and it's difficult to build those back up. They tend to, I don't know if it's unwritten rules, but they follow a procedure that the gatekeeper's gotten comfortable with that's not necessarily well documented. And so the centralized major projects group will come in and say, nope, we want it to be black and white. We want it to be a system-driven approach. Start big, and then we'll scale it down. And you lose all of that relationship and that soft skills, that development of those smaller programs when you do that. And it's so much more helpful to start with the small cap, things that were able to be executed with limited resources, and then build them up into the larger projects. And we don't usually do it that way, unfortunately.
Great.
I'm dying to answer that. There's a question up there that says, how many small projects can a typical PM handle before risking decreased quality? The answer is one. The answer is one. Yeah. And now, of course, there's a hockey stick here where yes, it decreases and then it really falls off a cliff. And I can't put a number to it. It's really about the complexity of the individual projects. As we know, more complex projects, especially when we apply advanced work packaging, actually become many small projects. And so you need to look at the complexity of the individual projects. I'd say handling more than 5 or 6 different work fronts, different packages, separated among multiple projects, is where you really start to lose that quality. I don't know why that half dozen number seems to always fit, but the project engineers that have worked for me in the past, it really takes a dive off the cliff once you stretch them past about 5 or 6 projects.
I like the next one. Do you find the same contractor groups can be deployed on both small and large projects? And of course, as a contractor, I'm going to say absolutely. So maybe let one of the owners answer that question.
From our perspective, I was just going to add on that one real quickly. Yes and no. A lot of times the local engineering contractor becomes pretty specialized, and again, that's because we've kind of formed the symbiosis with them, where they don't even look like their parent contractor necessarily a lot of times. And a lot of times they're not. They maybe have been somebody who's changed ownership 3 or 4 times, and you got the same personnel there. So they're kind of following whatever's been developed at that site. So it can be challenging a little bit sometimes when you're trying to take advantage of the local contractor representation, then also trying to mix them in with a larger contractor from a remote site, because you will find that the tools and systems might clash a little bit.
Excellent. So we've got about a minute left, and so let's look at a question that might be answered in a minute. Is there anything, like for example, the second one, who might be the appropriate person or group to successfully manage key internal stakeholders or gatekeepers? How's your experience in that, Justin?
Sorry.
No, Roger, absolutely, please.
I would say that the appropriate person to manage the internal stakeholders will be the project manager, from my experience. But when you talk about gatekeepers, then you can talk about coordinators, engineers. They can do this in an appropriate way. That's from my perspective.
I agree under most circumstances. So the project manager obviously is the person who's been given the authority and the responsibility and the power to make that direct interaction with the gatekeeper, to walk right into their office and build that relationship. But you need to look carefully, make sure there's not someone more capable on your team. And somebody who usually comes out is our operations rep. On all the projects that I've worked on, we've had someone who's been the prepare to operate manager or the operations rep, and they may already have 20 years of experience with that refinery manager, with that executive who's in charge of as gatekeeper. And they might be the better person to initiate that relationship than a project manager who's been flown in from corporate to take over a project here. So I recommend always looking to that person first before just defaulting to the project manager.
Great. Thank you, Justin. Well, we've run out of time. Thank you again, everyone. Give a hand to the panel. Did a fabulous job.
Thank you, Vikas. Good job, Vikas. Thank you.
And I'm sure they'll be able to answer any questions you might have afterwards.
Great job. Thank you.